computer. Okay. Friends who are joining us by recording, we want to welcome you. We have gathered with us some wonderful people for Tuesday morning Bible study. And we are studying the book God and the Pandemic by N.T. Wright. And we're going to study the Bible, of course, since it's still Bible study. But if you have still need the book, I have one extra copy, thanks to a generous donation from one of the study members, and so I would be glad to get that to anybody who still needs one as well. And if you don't need it, it'll go in the church library for good keeping. We have all been affected by the pandemic. Obviously, that's an understatement, isn't it? And we don't seek here today to wallow in that. You know, most of us have the book and have read at least the first chapter today. Some people went ahead and read on ahead because they got on into it, and that's fine. But we have all been affected, and it has raised questions for us that, you know, we probably should have been asking a long time ago about other things, like, why do bad things happen? How does God let pandemics happen? What's the nature of this, and what do we do about it? You know, do we run for the hills? Do we jump up and down and scream and shout about it? Do we muster on? You know, what do we do? And that's where the first chapter today starts. In fact, if I didn't look, if I guess there was technically an introduction no, really the first chapter is kind of like the introduction in a way. It just brings us, it kind of collects us from our varied places and experiences and gives us a chance to think about the big questions, and at least go from the everyday, you know, the masks and the touching and the 6 feet and all that stuff. And it just takes us for a few moments to zoom back and say, and put it in context and say, what would God say to us in this time? So I'm glad you're with us, and I'm glad for those who are here live, and for those who are watching. I would start by guiding us to chapter 1, of course, and to this place in the very beginning when he talks about how the very early days, which were not that long ago, if you think about it, at least in this book came out very quickly, but it was only March. You know, it feels like it's been forever, doesn't it? But it was only March when all of a sudden we began to get vital warnings, emergency warnings to stay at home, don't go out, don't make contact, stay away from folks, get a mask. Even before that, it was kind of making its way. It was sort of a world thing. We'd heard of SARS and mad cow, but all of a sudden it was like everything changed. And I thought we'd just take a moment to share where we were and how we heard and what our initial reactions were. If you can think back to that moment, and I'll give an example. It was the week, it was like a Thursday, and we were going to have church on Sunday, and everything was going to be fine. We were going to pray about the pandemic, but, you know, we were just going to have church. And all of a sudden, my bishop said, and bishops across the nation said, please don't have in-person worship. We've suddenly gotten this, you know, information. We've gotten this health information. Please don't even go and gather together in worship. And you know what, folks, as much as I have to do all this, you know, coronavirus task force and safety stuff and wear a mask, and preschool has to do all their stuff, I was resistant. It wasn't until Powell Osteen at First Methodist said he was not going to not be open, that I said, well, I guess I have to. My DS called the DSs all called every single pastor and told them, look, you guys, we can't kick you out. They said, but you need to really not hold services. And, and it was probably Saturday morning before I felt like I was giving in. I felt like because worshiping in person was vital. And I was gonna, we wouldn't close for a snowstorm. We were not going to close for something on the news. So I had to sink in. And sure enough, I pulled together my daughter Emily, and we held a little something on Zoom on that first day. We blasted out to everybody, don't go to church, phone call. And it was chaotic because we had to get a phone call out to everybody. We had to tell all the musicians. And from that moment, everything about doing church changed like that within a day. Your lives changed. And so I want you to have a chance, and you don't have to speak, but would anybody be willing to speak about where you were and how it hit you? What was that like? It was kind of like that. People talk about the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that. Where were you? What did it mean? What happened for you?
Well, we had made reservations to take a flight to go to New Orleans when Amy went on spring break in March, and of course New Orleans was one of the two cities hit badly at first, and so we had to cancel and managed to get most of our money back, and then the plane tickets are good for a year, but who knows if we'll be able to get back within a year. But we ended up having to change plans on that, and I always wanted to go to New Orleans, never had. It was hard to give that up.
It was. You wanted to. I mean, it would have made me mad. I know it just, and that was an anger. Anger was a response for all of us to this, wasn't it? And still is. Anger. Anybody else? John, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, that was that Friday was March 13th. So lucky Friday the 13th. But that was also, I was subbing, and that was the last day that school was in session. And I remember they made an announcement. And the virus, they were already aware, because the room I was subbing for a Spanish teacher, and she had everybody had their little spray bottle of disinfectant.
Yeah.
And then they told the kids to make sure no official decision had been made, but you kind of knew what was coming, because they told the kids, make sure you take your iPad home and all of that. And I remember during the planning, which was the end of the day for that particular teacher, I wiped down all the desks, thinking, okay, when they come back Monday, but still that was, and I was supposed to then be at a statewide student council, the state convention that weekend, which we had called off 2 days before because it just wasn't worth the risk. So, but yeah, who knew when we walked out of that school on March 13th that we wouldn't be going back? And Craigman County is still not back. So
no, our students just they just it was like school was out but not out. I mean, it was spring break, but it was summer all of a sudden, and then it was like it was 2 weeks to get them all back on e-classes, and it took that long to shift all that, at least at Carteret. I know our girls had spring break, and then they had this week where they didn't where they were being told, just hang in there, just wait, you're gonna start these Google Classrooms. Linda, were you raising your hand too? Tell us about your experience.
Yes, well, Certainly, I had lots of plans that went awry, as did
Definitely.
everyone. But I think that the most memorable thing, and it's still with me, obviously, is my concern for my sister. Now, we had plans to go to New York State in June. We had plans then we would go back in July, and then maybe even in August to help her with some medical issues that she was having. And she doesn't have anybody else. She has me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, she said to me, that she was so worried that if she caught it, she would die. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she was in terror of this. She's in very poor health, and just she's like a hermit anyway. But this really, I mean, she really became a shut-in. So, in preparation for our visit with her in June, Ray and I were so careful to make sure that we were bringing our purest and healthiest selves to support her as best we could.
Mm-hmm.
And that visit went very well. But then, obviously, New York State closed to North Carolina and many other states as well. So we have not been able to be there in person with her. And I know that that's been really hard for her. But there was a strange blessing in all of this, and that is that my friend, who's a social worker in New York, suggested that I use a shopping service called Instacart,
Yeah.
where I can. And one of the reasons I go to New York State is to help my sister do heavy shopping. I mean, she shops for months at a time. This is a big job for her, and I always help her with that. So this tool, this online tool that I'm able to access, she is not, I am, is a way that I can be a presence for her that I wouldn't have tried otherwise, probably not. And she is so happy about the fact that she's able to have food that is delivered to her door, no touch, they leave it on the door, and I can order it for her.
Yeah.
We work together on the list. We work together on the items that she's going to purchase. And so, as awful as this has been for her, there has been a way. We have found a way. We've
Yeah.
been blessed by a way to be able to connect, and I've still been able to help her,
Good.
even though I'm 1,000 miles away.
Good. Good. Thank you. Any other memories of the first moment, the where you were when you first heard? Yeah, Diane, were you raising your hand?
Do I have sound?
You're muted
I don't know how to unmute on this.
on your own device.
I don't.
Get over here and punch.
We hear her, but we're hearing her through.
She's coming over here.
She's going to her sister's.
What?
I was on
Pushed him out of the way.
watching the NBA finals,
Hmm.
playoffs. And Mark Cuban is sitting on the sidelines with his phone, just scrolling news headlines. And he stops and scrolls back up, looks at the screen, and looked up at his team and looked back down on the screen. That's how he found out that game was over.
Whoa.
And the teams left the court. I flew out the next day, and it was sort of like getting on the last plane coming out of Da Nang.
Mm.
And I flew in, got it home a little after midnight, bought some groceries, and basically have been on my property since the 13th of March.
Man.
It was his expression just said it all.
Wow, Diane, that's pretty wild. That's a unique experience. I don't think any of us could say we were in that position. Interesting though. My goodness, you won't forget that. Well, those experiences have all affected us, and this might be the first time, I don't know, that maybe for some of us that we've talked about that first day, as we would have, say, where were we when the Challenger exploded, or where were we when the towers fell, or something like that. And it's perhaps helpful for us to do that. It's hard, but I think we all can kind of appreciate that. Now, let's get to what N.T. Wright says in chapter 1. He writes, so does anybody know what's going on? Why is this happening? Is someone trying to tell us something? What are we supposed to do about it? And he talks about how in the ancient world, when major disasters happened, people associate it with angry gods. Something bad happened. Somebody did something bad. The gods are angry, right? And then in the world of Greece and Rome, they had gods, but they had kind of gotten more sophisticated about the gods. They had more stories, mythological stories about the gods, but they also had more of a sense that the people had some control. They didn't have the science we have, but they began to start doing some philosophizing about it, and they started thinking about, well, what does it mean when bad things happen? And so high-minded philosophers came up with 3 alternatives, he writes, and that's on page, page 2. And the first one is that he mentions is the Stoics. The Stoics. And he said, I love how he just puts these in real stark terms. He says, here's what the Stoics would say if they were in the pandemic. The Stoics would say, everything is programmed to turn out the way it does. You can't change it. Just learn to fit in. Nothing you can do. You just go on and kind of separate yourself from the world around you. He said, alternatively, and here's the second group, the Epicureans. Now, I don't expect y'all to be able to say that one 5 times fast, but you'd be surprised how much we today are influenced by Epicurus and the Epicureans. But here's what he said, what they would say. They went around and said, everything's random. You can't do anything about it. Just make yourself as comfortable as you can. Okay? That there was no great mind behind what happened. You just had to do the best you can. And then the Platonists, and of course we know enough about. We've heard the Plato, but we don't know. But when I hear Plato, I think, good, it's playtime. We're going to go play with some Play-Doh. But Plato, he had some followers, and he said that this life is just a shadow of reality. That what you see is not real reality. That bad things happen here, but we're on to another world. We're just souls, if you want to call it that, beings who are stuck in these fleshy containers. So, and he said, we have our modern equivalents too, we have our Stoics who just want to tough it out in the coronavirus. And sometimes you might hear somebody say, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. Have you heard that? Right?
It is what it is.
Yeah. And then we have some modern Epicureans, and they say, well, this stuff will happen, so just settle down, just take care of yourself and watch a lot of Netflix and just wait for it to finish, And then and some of us do a little bit of all of these, don't we? Some of us are a mix. We have a mix. We're like, well, if I get it, but I'm going to watch Netflix anyway. So and then some of us, even Christians, are Platonists, and we just kind of say, death isn't the worst thing that can happen because we're going on to the new world. We're going on to heaven one day, and so let's just be sensible about it. And I love this. He says, let's just be sensible, but please don't shut down the churches or the golf courses. That kind of just, but a lot of us are Platonists about it. And we didn't know maybe we didn't know maybe we didn't know there was a name for our philosophies, but we've all had philosophies about this thing. But then he asks us, the best answer to the question of why has not always worked out. The question of why is really, really difficult. But he wants to change our focus to the question of what. What? And so on page 3, toward the bottom, he talks about what was happening in the UK. Of course, that's where he lives. But he talked about the first responders and the frontliners and the medical community. And he says they are doing, and I'll just read from page 3, they are doing what the early Christians did in times of plague. That was kind of interesting to me. Wait a minute, the Christians, why did the Christians do something different than what all the non-Christians did back then? In the first few centuries of our era, when serious sickness would strike a town or city, the well-to-do would run for the hills. Part of the problem was often low-lying, fetid air in a town. The Christians would stay and nurse people. Sometimes they caught the disease and died, but people were astonished. What was this about? Oh, the Christians replied, we are followers of this man Jesus. He put his life on the line to save us, so that's what we do as well. And he puts it all in pretty brief terms, but I would tell you, basically, anybody who had any wealth, if there was a plague, they ran for the hills, and they had hideaways in the hills. So they quarantined too. But the rich and the wealthy enough, the people of upper class, and they didn't have a lot of middle class, but people who have upper class, they got away and let the poor people in the working class deal with it down in the city. But the Christians went back in and worked on helping others. And so then that was what leads us to that bottom of page 4, a Christian response. But before I do that, I want to ask you another question. Of these different alternatives, the Stoics and the Epicureans and the Platonists, why do you think those fall short of the Christian response? Why do you think the Christian response is different?
Taylor, a long time ago, I read the book, Bad Things Why do bad things happen to good people?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I finished reading it, it was a well-written, well-documented book by a Jewish author.
Yeah.
And the thought that came to me when I finished reading was, but I know Jesus.
Mm. Yeah.
I know Jesus. Yeah. And what you're telling me doesn't give me hope.
Mm.
But my knowledge of Jesus does give me hope.
Mm. That it does, and it changes how you react.
Yes.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other responses to that question? How does it different? Yes, Linda.
Well, and I did read ahead, but the difference it appears to be is that the Christians in early times went and actually did something about it and helped other people.
Yeah.
And took risks and were very courageous in their approach to this, as opposed to, battening the hatches and staying home and putting the shutters down and, having food delivered. I don't know. But, and it seems to me that that's the challenge that we face today, is that we can stay and take care of ourselves, or we can try to figure out how to help other people, which may put us at risk. And there's a variety of different kinds of risks, but it's the doing something about it and helping people get through it. I think that's the key here.
Yes. For example, you were able to quarantine, help your sister, I believe you said, quarantine for her safety. So, he talks later, as you say, that that Christians don't, it doesn't automatically mean running into the burning building. But it means, maybe it does in some cases, but that, not in a whole intentional martyrdom as much as finding a way to think about what's going on, a better way to think about what's going on than the way the Platonists and the Epicureans and the Stoics did. Yeah. Diane.
I was just thinking that all of the first three philosophies ask the question, why?
Yeah.
And the Christians ask what?
And the Christian response asks what? Right. What to do. What to do. And it doesn't mean that the questions of why don't matter, and it doesn't mean that Rabbi Kushner in his book that Fran mentioned doesn't have wisdom for us. There's wisdom in the Bible, lots of wisdom about, and N.T. Wright, gets into that too. But yeah, there's the what. He wants to go to the what, and sometimes that's the best place to go, when you don't know why. Sometimes that's the best. Any others? These are good responses. Yeah, Lee.
Taylor, I think some of it has to do with the focus. The guys that run to the hills are focused on themselves. I think the early Christians were focused on the community and others, not necessarily themselves. But they, like you guys are getting at, you can do wise things and you can do foolish things. So, but I think the focus is on the community and not yourself.
Right. Linda didn't just say, you go take care of yourself and find your food. She figured out a way to help someone get food, we haven't just said, oh, school kids, y'all just go do your work at home best you can. We've said, let's see if we can bring you in and help you do your schoolwork at the church, that kind of thing. Yeah. So then on page 4, we get that Christian response, and he says, faced with the rapid spread of the coronavirus, many people in churches have reached for Christian equivalents of the knee-jerk reactions, by which he means the Stoics and the Epicureans and the Platonists, right? The world is full of conspiracy theories anyway. Some in America think it's all China's fault. Some in China said it's all America's fault. And no doubt there are 1,000 ideas running around, spreading themselves as easily as the virus itself. About that. The ideas, the the blame game. And then he jumps down, though, to the next paragraph and says on page 5, and then there are specifically would-be Christian conspiracies. And this is where it kind of rubber hits the road a little bit here, because I know a couple pastors who have gotten co-opted into these Christian conspiracies. Some are saying it's a sign of the end. Now, I know, I see Jim shaking his head. Jim, sometime you and I will, I'll send you a couple YouTube videos of, if you want to see some of that, or maybe you don't, but I know a couple of pastors who have taken up the mantle of prophet, and at least in the lowest sense of the word, and have said, this is the end, my friends, like, Jim Morrison and the Doors, this is the end. He points to, the Left Behind folks and that kind of thing. But he says,
the mantle of prophet, Profit.
Yeah, Profit.
You are right, Jim.
Right.
You're right.
I know one in Branson, Missouri, that will sell you some buckets of prepper food, buckets of mac and cheese if you just add water and, in your bunker and that kind of stuff. Anyway, I digress. But he explains, though, that basically that version is Platonic, is Plato. Going to heaven is the aim, leaving the world behind to its own devices. And then he says, for other Christians, it's simply a way, at bottom of 5, of saying, this is a moment of opportunity. Now everybody is thinking about death rather than wondering what cupcake to buy. Perhaps there will be a massive turning to God. Perhaps we can use this moment to tell our friends about Jesus, and maybe this time they'll listen. And, yeah, maybe. But we don't stop there. I think that's the important thing, is that the Christian response is wider and broader than opportunistic responses. You can do that. You can bring people to Jesus, but then you still have to deal with, and God bless you, but you still have to deal with the problems and the why and the how are they going to get safe and how are they going to get to school and and how are they going to get internet. And I saw this morning, the went viral with and it's happening everywhere, with the 2 little girls in the big city, and they're sitting outside Taco Bell on the curb so they can use the free Wi-Fi so they can do their homework because of the digital divide, in their community. So, I mean, this is a time to look to God. I mean, believe me when I preach that, but that's not the whole story, right? Others quote the Old Testament prophets to produce a version of pagan theories. And some people go back to, when bad things happen, it must be God that's done it, because so that must mean he's angry with us. And so there are people who go right to that. And there's some trouble. God is not satisfied with the way the world is, that's for sure. And so there's a lot to be said for, thinking of it that way. But I don't know. It's just, there's got to be something, and there is something greater, to which he will point us in chapters 2 and 3, of course, as well. But for the moment, he turns our attention. Well, actually, he doesn't. He turns our attention to Amos. But in a study, there was a little study guide made about this, and the study guide, it's not in your book, but you're welcome to find it on their website if you want to. But you can just, I've got it, and I'll just use it to help us along the way. But in the study guide, they point to 2 passages, and this is where we're going to get some more Bible in here. Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 8. And you don't have to look it up because I'm going to read it, but if you want to look it up, you can. But if you want to write it down, if you just want to write it down, you can, okay? Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 8. Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 8. Of course, prize goes to whoever spells Deuteronomy right. All right, there you go. I've gotten to where at my autofill on my computer, I start typing DEUTER and it fills out Deuteronomy for me because it's seen me type Deuteronomy so many times. Now let me read you this one, and this is familiar, but the question, as you hear this though, the question before you is, why does God have a special concern for the poor? I.e., why did the early Christians, respond the way they did? Okay, remember, I'm going to read from Deuteronomy, and I'm also going to read from Leviticus, and these were Old Testament texts. But the early Christians had begun to see Jesus we're seeing Jesus as the embodiment of these Old Testament texts, that the old law. Okay, Deuteronomy 15. Every 7th year you shall grant a remission of debts. And this is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall remit the claim that is held against a neighbor, not exacting of it of a neighbor who is a member of the community, because the Lord's remission has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may exact it, but you must remit your claim on whatever any member of your community owes you. There will, however, be no one in need among you. Now, don't let that go by quick, folks. There will be, however, no one in need among you, because the Lord is sure to bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession to occupy. If only you will obey the Lord by your God by diligently observing his entire commandment that I command you today. When the Lord your God has blessed you as he promised you, you will lend to many nations. I mean, then Israel's not going to be the borrower. Israel's not going to be the one that owes all, the Assyrians for all those for those crops or whatever. But you, when the Lord your God has blessed you, you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. You will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. If there is among you anyone in need, now hear that, a member of your community in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-headed or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand, willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. And then let's look at Leviticus, and we're going to kind of treat them together because they're complementary. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Wow. Marks of great charity and generosity in the people. God shows this special concern for the sick and the outcast and the slave. And the early Christians in those early days saw that, and they remembered these, especially these Christians that were Jews, too, first, and many of them remembered these ways and teachings. How do those texts today inform how you think about the what of the pandemic?
Still need to reach out and help others and do what we can.
Mm-hmm. The bar is set, so high, isn't it? I mean, there's no room for there's no qualifications or conditions. It's straight up, take care of your neighbor, love your neighbor. Don't just love your neighbor by taking care of your neighbor and the foreigner and the alien and the vulnerable.
Word again.
How has God had a special concern for the poor, and how do these texts inform us going forward? And I think they give us a model on which to think about these matters. Something greater than the philosophers, great as they were. And we're going to keep seeing some of those philosophers, those Stoics and that stuff in us sometimes, and in other people. But that the Christians could be marked by something peculiar in that time. So much so that the people would look around and say, "What are you Christians doing?" I love that, that part. And he points out, we're going to these places because Jesus did this for others. And Jesus did this for us. Think about all those healing. Think about all those. He touched lepers. He touched corpses. I mean, all that was considered verboten. You were not to do those things, but yet he did. Yet he did. Now, we will get into the next time into a little bit more of the Old Testament because he's primed the pump here for us to look at Lamentations next week. I believe a couple of you like to look at Lamentations and really start to ask some of those questions and see how they handled those questions in the old days about who was at fault, and was it always God is angry and so bad things happened? And it's not that simple. We're going to look at some Job too next time. But today's been a good foray into this topic, enough to make us kind of think, enough to kind of break us out of the usual ways of thinking about it, and also just to do a little bit of group talk, I don't want to call it therapy, but a little bit of group talk about where were we, where are we, what's it feel like right now, that kind of stuff. And it's hard. It's overwhelming. I mean, I can't even get my head in my heart. I get, my anxiety goes up a little bit, when I watch the numbers climb and I'm thinking about, oh, what's going to happen? I trust in the Lord always, of course, and that's what we do. But all of us, let's admit it, this is really hard on people and hard on all of us in some way. And it's really hard on our souls and our spirits. And I think just doing this study is a big step, because it's something that the world's not necessarily doing. The world's not asking, and understandably, everybody's not stopping to ask, all the why questions. But Wright would have us think about that, but move to the what questions, and we'll come back to some of the why questions a little later too. We will, and learn more about that. Any final thoughts or needs or housekeeping of the group? We'll do this again next week.
Taylor, if you want to see my blood pressure go up, I get in my golf cart and I drive downtown, and I want to be waving a banner that says, "Love your neighbor, wear your mask." Well,
okay. Well, there you go. So we have, when, as you said, we're not, remember folks, we're not Stoics. We're to pretend that this is just kind of going on around us and we're just making our way through it, and it doesn't affect us. No, that's not us. That's not us. Christians are affected. Christians are emotionally, spiritually affected. It would be unchristian, if you will, to separate ourselves from it and make it somebody else's problem. Does that make sense? I think that's what he's telling us today. So keep in mind that this is something we're all going through, and let's see what God has to say to us. Well, we want to thank those who were watching later on too, and we want to invite you, if you're available at 10:30 a.m. to join us for live. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for this time. This has been so special, and please read chapter 2 by next time, and we will do this again. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Oh God, you are the gift of grace to us, that in this time we could remember and understand a little bit more of what's going on, and a little bit more of what voices come up in our hearts. Because we've all felt in our hearts and in our heads a little bit of each of these voices, these philosophies, these reactions. And it's so difficult to try to mix them with our faith, and then have to get creative about how to live our faith in this strange time. But you've shown us, and you've reminded us through the writer, and also through your Holy Spirit, and through the Old Testament, that people have been to hell and back on earth. And yet your word doesn't change. Your hope, your love, your consideration for the poor and the vulnerable doesn't change. And your calling to us is shown and exemplified in Jesus. And so we're not going to figure it all out right here, right now, but we're going to focus on Jesus and just keep him out ahead of us and in front of us. For this we offer in his name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks,
you.